Yeah, so after REAP, it was pretty quick there. I was there for 5, 6 months, and personal reasons, some things happened in the family. It's like I need to be home. I was in Virginia, South Carolina, maybe home like a weekend a month type deals, or like really what it felt like. But I ended up going to Strata right after that and getting a job in the operations room. They had a great package, 7 days on, 7 days off. I was like, I'll take my mini vacation every week. But the catch was you're working 12-hour shifts, and every week you go from day shift to night shift. So that one became a little difficult after about a year of doing it. I just had a hard time sleeping after a while. You know, you have to figure out what works for your body. And after a year, I realized I'm like, I need to prioritize my sleep a little better. But again, great learning experience. That was my first role in operations, and Strata, they they had a large portfolio and a fantastic team in the operations center. So I got to really dive into all the data applications that I learned in college and focus on solar and really get into the weeds. When you're in the operations room, you have, I mean, all the techs that you're talking to, people coming in and out, like investors look at the operations room as really like a first step into a company, because they see it and they're like, all right, they've got all these weather maps up and they've got different platforms showing like how fast cars are going or trucks are going and where everybody's at, these automated tickets. And I mean, I really enjoyed it. It was great. The problem is like we were just tired. Like once you hit about like day 4 or 5, you're exhausted. And like most of us had to drive like 30, 40 minutes to get to work. And you know, after a 12-hour shift, you're just like, man, let me put a cot upstairs or something, take a nap.
Yeah, no kidding. Is
Yeah.
that common for operation companies to run 7 days on, 7 days off, or is that a strata thing?
Um, I think everybody's got their own version of how they want things done. I mean, a lot of
Sure.
people do like a DuPont where it's like 4 days on, 3 days off, 3 days on, 4 days off.
Right.
Um, I think, if I'm not mistaken, they like took it out of like nuclear operations. Somebody came up with it and it really worked out well for the lifestyles, everybody that was there. Um, it worked out for me really well at first too, because I loved having those 7 days off. I'd go up to the mountains, go see friends in college, go to the beach, wherever it might be, and it was great. It was the transition to night shift that just for me personally didn't work, but some people are able to just switch over a lot easier. But coming off of night shift and then trying to transition back to a normal sleep routine, I pushed as long as I could, and then had to just say like, sorry guys, I need a break from this.
Yeah, a lot of energy drinks, I'm sure.
Uh, and the funny thing is, like, they had two really, really nice coffee machines at Strata. And I think they were spending a bit too much money on them, but I'm not complaining because it was free coffee and I could get a whatever kind of latte I want at a click of a button. And I was just like, yes, please. But you know, after about 6 months of drinking 4 or 5 cups of coffee at night, you're just, my body needs a detox. I can't do caffeine anymore. Um, but it was great because I think back then it was like 2.3 gigawatt of solar that we were looking at, a little over 200 sites as well. But there's so many people at Strata that just, I mean, they're so smart. And I spent a lot of time on the phone with the technicians and just really trying to get to know like, hey, what are you guys actually doing? Like, I know I'm telling you something's offline, but what steps are being done? Because that that's important for us in the operations room as much as it is for them. Because like having that line of communication, we were working off of alarms and items that just said like, hey, something's offline, put in a ticket. And that's all I really did there with the role I was in and the level I was in was something's offline, make a ticket. And then as I progressed through it, it's like, all right, something's offline, open up the drawing set, make a ticket. All right, talk to the technician, tell them what's in the drawing set, make a more detailed ticket. And I progressed so much there, and they have it set up really well for people to progress in that manner because everything is a learning opportunity if you allow it to be. I mean, we could sit there and just make tickets all day and you could say a level 1, but it's one thing about the solar industry is like everybody's got some drive. Like everybody's trying to get something out of their current role or something brought them there that, you know, made them want to learn something new. And it's always fun. Like the longer you're in the industry, especially North Carolina, the more people that you become familiar with, or, you know, you drop a name and 3 people at your new company know them. And it's just like, oh, wow, great. So it's fun, but always something.
We're all right. So one thing that I've always wondered about, because, you know, sometimes I would be on the phone with, you know, a control center operator and, well, I worked for EPC always, right? So energizing a piece of equipment at the first time is probably one of the most dangerous times, other than after a failure, obviously.
Right.
So I've always kind of wondered, were you ever on the other end of the phone when an emergency happened or something crazy happened? And if so, like what happened?
Oh man. Yeah, I mean, nothing too crazy, but I've definitely taken a couple of fires on sites where section liners blow. Yeah. And thinking back, um, I really, the biggest thing when it comes to like an emergency when you're on the phone is just like staying calm and knowing like, hey, my training takes place. Like I have training for this. There's an SOP somewhere. Let's get all the steps. Let's get the information. Let's make sure everybody's safe. Let's de-energize if we can. But really, almost, hopefully all control rooms go through training practices and drills. They should. It's for their own safety. It's for the safety of the people in the field. But when you're going through the training, you might think like, oh, I hope I don't freak out when this actually happens. But typically you're just like, all right, adrenaline, I know the steps, I know where my red book's at, and you pop it open. You shut things down and you follow the steps and you just make sure everything's going to take place. I think really the craziest thing was a fire, and then having to shut down an entire site, contact the utility, get everybody on the phone, get the fire department out there. And just knowing, all right, I have everything documented, written down, everybody's safe, and I can breathe now. I'm going to go take my 15-minute break because it's just been a hectic 45. And so the worst is like when an emergency situation happens, but then like all the other phones are ringing and you're the only one in there, and you're just like, why now? Why do you go to lunch? But first thing that you learn is just how to prioritize things. Like if the phone's ringing and a technician's on the other end trying to get some information or check into a site, whatever it might be, that's not a priority when there's an emergency happening. I mean, that's where all your focus is at. You can call everybody else back. There's, if it's a utility calling because something has to go offline, you have a window of opportunity. So as soon as you get a lull, it's like, all right, I've got all my information here. Everybody's where they need to be at. I'll check back in 5 minutes. Go check your other phones, check your logs. There's always a system in place, and there's always the training to kind of kick back in. But Yeah, there's definitely a little bit of an adrenaline and just like jumping around. There's always typically there's always like two desks that are getting operated on at the same time. And in larger control rooms, it's 6+ desks at the same time. Phones just going everywhere, people on their headsets yelling over at things, and like you don't necessarily think about it until it's happening because a lot of the times, I mean, luckily things go pretty well. But there's a lot of moving parts in solar still, a lot of things that can happen. And it, for whatever reason, they always happen at once. And it's like, if something's happening on this site and you're probably going to have something happening down the road or somewhere else, like just it's always happened that way for me, where it's like, all right, now I've got to juggle 6 things, even though the last 4 hours have been completely quiet. But then you get your lull again and you catch back up. So
I always tried to mess with you guys because I felt like, operations and maintenance was just so strict and rigid. And I work an EPC, and not only that, like I'm typically by myself, like nobody's looking at what I'm doing. So when I would call into you guys, I feel like it's kind of stressful on your end. So I would always just, you know, I'd keep it professional, but I would act as ridiculous as possible while just riding that line. And hey, if you've never seen a control center, look it up because like, those scenes that you see in movies where like everybody's standing by or behind a computer and there's these giant screens with like the entire United States or something on it. Like that's a real thing. And that
yeah.
is, what he was working in essentially. I never saw Stratus Controls Center, but I imagine it's fairly on par with like a Cypress or Axe Control Center.
Yeah. It was the control centers get a lot of money because we need all these screens, and it's not easy connecting 30 different TVs together with 9 different computers all into one thing. I feel for everybody in IT and the solar industry, like
Sure.
unsung heroes. And it's just it is hectic, and it does look like a lot when you first come in. There's that wow factor of like, oh man, like there is the United States completely up, and it's got all the weather patterns, for all of our sites happening, and 200 little pins with different levels of capacity next to them, and you're just like, man, there's a lot going on, but you fall into it pretty quickly, and you can quickly recognize a red dot here, or something's offline, or all right, West Coast is looking green, it's going to be a good day, like everything's online. But it's pattern recognition is really what it comes down to, and just being able to prioritize the tasks at hand. I mean, every single one of these sites have thousands of components, millions of components nowadays, where it's just getting bigger and bigger. And that, just from a personal perspective, in the last 5 years of how much everything's grown, but a lot of people have been in this industry for quite a while too. And like, you talk to some people that are like, yeah, working on some sites from 2007 that we built, and it's just like, the early days of utility solar, which is kind of surprising too. Like solar panels have been around for quite a while, but the average utility solar site in the United States is 4.5 years old.